All-consuming the cultures of food in modern life. Ruby Tandoh. Synopsis and critical review. Food is among the most ordinary features of human existence. Every human being must eat, yet the apparently simple act of eating has become entangled with some of the most complicated questions of modern life. Who are we? What social class do we belong to? How should we treat our bodies? What do our purchases say about our values? What do we owe the environment and the people who produce our food? In All-Consuming the Cultures of Food in Modern Life, Ruby Tandoh uses food as a cultural lens through which to examine contemporary society. Her subject is not primarily nutrition, gastronomy, or the mechanics of the food system, but the meanings that modern societies attach to eating. The book's central proposition is deceptively simple. Food is never merely food. What we eat can communicate class, ethnicity, gender, wealth, education, political values, and aspirations. A restaurant can become a marker of cultural sophistication. A dietary preference can become an identity. A supermarket purchase can become an ethical statement. A photograph of a meal can become a piece of personal branding. Even the decision to abstain from particular foods can communicate membership of a social or ideological community. Tandoh's achievement is to demonstrate how an activity that begins as biological necessity has been transformed into one of the principal arenas in which modern individuals construct and display identity. From necessity to identity. For most of human history, food was principally a question of availability and survival. Hunger was the fundamental problem. What mattered was whether enough food could be obtained, whether it was safe to eat, and whether it provided sufficient energy and nutrients. Modern affluent societies have changed the equation. For large sections of the population, food is available in extraordinary abundance. The central problem has increasingly become not whether there is something to eat, but what to eat, how to eat it, and what that choice means. That transformation is fundamental to Tandoh's argument. The contemporary consumer is surrounded by competing instructions. Eat locally. Eat organically. Eat plant-based. Eat traditionally. Eat clean. Avoid sugar. Avoid fat. Count calories. Do not count calories. Buy artisanal products. Avoid ultra-processed foods. Eat for pleasure. Eat for longevity. Eat ethically. The sheer volume of dietary instruction can turn eating into an intellectual and moral exercise. The result is what might be described as the ideological expansion of the meal. A plate of food is no longer simply a plate of food. It can become a statement about health, environmental responsibility, animal welfare, political identity, cultural authenticity, or social status. Tandoh is interested in precisely this transformation. Food as social language. One of the book's strongest themes is the idea that food operates as a form of social language. People communicate through taste. The foods we select, the restaurants we visit, the ingredients we recognize, and the culinary traditions we claim as our own, can all function as signals of social belonging. This recalls the work of French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, particularly his analysis of distinction. The proposition that supposedly personal tastes are partly shaped by social position and can reproduce class boundaries. Contemporary food culture provides abundant examples. Specialty coffee, natural wine, sourdough bread, farmers' markets, heritage vegetables, and elaborate tasting menus may be genuinely pleasurable. But they can also function as markers of cultural capital. Knowledge of obscure ingredients or fashionable culinary techniques can become a form of social competence. Conversely, foods associated with poverty or working-class life can be dismissed as unhealthy, unsophisticated, or culturally inferior, even when those judgments reveal more about the observer's social assumptions than the food itself. Tandoh encourages readers to recognize this hierarchy of taste. The important point is not that sophisticated food preferences are fraudulent. Rather, taste has a social history. What we regard as refined, authentic, exotic, wholesome, or vulgar does not emerge from nature. It is produced through culture. The commodification of authenticity. The modern food economy has become extraordinarily adept at selling authenticity. Consumers increasingly seek foods described as traditional, local, handmade, natural, ancestral, or authentic. These qualities promise an escape from industrial uniformity. Yet authenticity itself can become a commodity. A product marketed as traditional can be manufactured on an industrial scale. A once obscure cuisine can become a global trend. Ingredients associated with particular ethnic or regional communities can be repackaged for affluent consumers at premium prices. This process raises questions about cultural ownership and appropriation. Food travels remarkably easily across cultural boundaries. That movement can produce creativity and cultural exchange, but it can also obscure the histories and inequalities behind culinary traditions. Tandoh's broader point is that capitalism is extraordinarily capable of turning cultural meaning into market value. The consumer is not merely buying an object. Increasingly, the consumer is buying a story. The Politics of Choice. Perhaps the book's most important contribution is its questioning of the modern celebration of consumer choice. Contemporary societies frequently present food consumption as an exercise in individual freedom. Supermarkets offer thousands of products. Restaurants offer cuisines from around the world. Online platforms allow consumers to order almost anything. The apparent abundance of choice can create the impression that everyone possesses equal control over what they eat. But choice is never entirely free. Income determines what people can afford. Geography determines what is available. Working hours determine how much time people have to cook. Education influences nutritional knowledge. Family circumstances shape eating habits. Advertising influences desire. Cultural expectations influence taste. A wealthy professional living near an extensive network of supermarkets, restaurants, and farmers markets possesses a very different food environment from a low-income household in a neighborhood where fresh food is difficult to obtain. Thus, the rhetoric of individual food choice can conceal structural inequality. This is particularly important in debates about obesity, nutrition, and public health. When dietary outcomes are framed entirely as matters of individual responsibility, social determinants can disappear from view. Tandoh's cultural approach therefore intersects with a much larger political question: how much responsibility should be assigned to individuals for outcomes produced partly by the environments in which they live? Food and gender. Gender provides another major dimension of food culture. Historically, women have carried disproportionate responsibility for feeding families. Cooking, meal planning, shopping, and domestic food management have frequently been coded as feminine responsibilities. At the same time, women have been subjected to intense cultural pressure concerning their own bodies and appetites. The contradiction is striking. Women are expected to nourish others while exercising control over themselves. They are encouraged to cook indulgent meals for families while monitoring their own consumption. They are expected to enjoy food without appearing excessively interested in it, and to maintain socially approved bodies while navigating an enormous commercial industry devoted to selling both food and weight loss solutions. Modern wellness culture can appear to offer liberation from these older expectations, yet it can also reproduce them in new forms. The language changes, discipline becomes self-care, dieting becomes wellness, restriction becomes clean eating, but the underlying demand for bodily control may remain. Tandoh's analysis is valuable because it reveals that seemingly personal decisions about food can be embedded within long-standing structures of gender. The moralization of eating. Perhaps nowhere is the cultural transformation of food more obvious than in the emergence of food morality. Modern food discourse routinely classifies foods as good or bad, clean or dirty, natural or artificial, virtuous or sinful. Such language appears innocuous, but it can have profound psychological and social consequences. Once food is moralized, eating becomes a test of character. The person who eats well can be perceived as disciplined, responsible, and enlightened. The person who eats badly can be regarded as careless or lacking self-control. This creates a dangerous conceptual slippage. A nutritional choice becomes a moral judgment about the person making it. Tandoh is particularly effective in exposing this process. There is nothing inherently wrong with wanting to eat healthily. The problem begins when nutritional behavior becomes a measure of personal virtue. Such moralization can also obscure the complexity of nutrition itself. Human dietary requirements are influenced by physiology, activity, age, environment, culture, and socioeconomic circumstances. Food cannot always be reduced to binary categories of virtue and vice. Wellness and the culture of self-optimization. The contemporary wellness industry represents perhaps the ultimate expression of food as identity. Food is increasingly presented as a technology for improving the self. Eat this to sleep better. Avoid that to reduce inflammation. Consume another product to increase longevity. Track your intake. Measure your biomarkers. Optimize your microbiome. The language is increasingly technological. The body becomes a project. This fits neatly into the broader culture of self-optimization in which individuals are encouraged to treat themselves as ongoing improvement projects. Food becomes one more instrument through which the self can be managed. Tandoh's analysis is valuable because it asks what happens when eating becomes work. The modern consumer may have more information about food than any previous generation, yet that information can create anxiety rather than liberation. The paradox is profound. Greater nutritional knowledge can produce greater uncertainty. Consumerism and the foodie. The rise of the foodie provides another important case study. Food appreciation can undoubtedly enrich life. Cooking, discovering cuisines, learning culinary traditions, and sharing meals are deeply human activities. But food appreciation can also become consumer identity. The foodie does not simply eat. The foodie knows. Knowledge itself becomes a commodity. Knowing which restaurant is fashionable, which coffee beans are ethically sourced, or which chef pioneered a particular technique becomes a form of cultural capital. Social media intensifies the phenomenon. Food can now be photographed, reviewed, ranked, and displayed to an audience. The meal becomes content. Eating is transformed into something simultaneously consumed and performed. This is one of the defining characteristics of contemporary consumer culture. Experience itself becomes a product. The politics behind the plate. Although all consuming is fundamentally a cultural analysis, its implications are political. Food connects individuals to enormous systems of agricultural production, labor, transportation, finance, advertising, and retail. The apparently private act of purchasing a meal can therefore connect a consumer to global networks involving farm workers, factory workers, shipping companies, supermarkets, and multinational corporations. Ethical consumption attempts to make those connections visible. Fair trade products, organic farming, plant-based diets, and local food movements all represent attempts to transform consumption into a mechanism of political action. But Tandoh also invites skepticism about the limits of this approach. Consumer choice cannot substitute entirely for collective action or public policy. It is difficult to purchase one's way out of structural inequality. A consumer may choose an ethically produced product, but the existence of that choice does not necessarily transform the labor conditions, agricultural structures, or economic inequalities underlying the wider food system. This is one of the book's most important political lessons. Individual consumption can express values, but it cannot bear the entire burden of social transformation. A critical assessment. The great strength of all consuming is its ability to make the familiar strange. We eat every day, so it is easy to overlook the cultural assumptions embedded in eating. Tandoh makes those assumptions visible. She is particularly persuasive when discussing class, identity, gender, and the moralization of food. Her approach demonstrates that food culture is not peripheral to society. It is one of the places where society continuously reproduces itself. The book is also valuable because it resists simplistic explanations. It does not simply condemn consumer culture or romanticize traditional foodways. Instead, it shows how contradictory modern food culture can be. Consumers can be genuinely interested in sustainability while simultaneously participating in consumerism. They can enjoy culinary diversity while reproducing cultural hierarchies. They can pursue health while becoming trapped in obsessive self-monitoring. These contradictions are precisely what make the subject interesting. There are limitations, however. Readers looking for a comprehensive account of food production, nutrition, agricultural economics, or public health may find the book insufficiently material. Its emphasis is cultural and interpretive. The physical realities of farming, food processing, supply chains, and nutritional physiology are secondary to questions of meaning. There is also a risk inherent in cultural criticism itself. Once almost every preference is interpreted as a social signal, genuine individual preference can become difficult to distinguish from cultural conditioning. Not every person who enjoys expensive coffee is attempting to demonstrate social status. Not every dietary preference is an ideological statement. Human beings can simply like things. This tension does not invalidate Tandoh's analysis, but it is worth remembering. The strongest reading of All Consuming is therefore not that everything about food is determined by class, ideology, and consumer capitalism, but that our apparently personal relationships with food are shaped by cultural forces to a much greater degree than we normally recognize. Why the book matters. The significance of All Consuming becomes clearer when placed alongside the larger intellectual debates of the 2020s. The contemporary world is experiencing simultaneous crises of obesity, food insecurity, ecological degradation, industrial agriculture, climate change, and widening inequality. At the same time, food has become one of the most visible arenas of lifestyle politics. Veganism, vegetarianism, organic food, low-carbohydrate diets, ultra-processed food debates, regenerative agriculture, and personalized nutrition are no longer simply questions of what people eat. They have become competing visions of what a good life should look like. Food therefore sits at the intersection of biology and ideology. That is the enduring contribution of Tandoh's book. She reminds us that the modern food system does not merely feed people. It teaches them how to think about themselves. It tells consumers what successful people eat, what healthy people eat, what ethical people eat, what sophisticated people eat, and what irresponsible people eat. The supermarket shelf becomes a cultural text. The restaurant becomes a social stage. The meal becomes an identity statement. And the body becomes a project. Conclusion. All Consuming: The Cultures of Food in Modern Life is ultimately a book about much more than food. It is a study of modern identity and consumer capitalism, with food providing the most accessible and intimate window into the subject. Its central insight, that eating has been transformed from biological necessity into a cultural language, is both persuasive and consequential. We no longer merely eat to live. We increasingly eat to belong, to distinguish ourselves, to express values, to manage our bodies, to perform identity, and to participate in markets that sell not simply nourishment but aspiration. The book's most important challenge is therefore directed at the assumption that our food choices are entirely our own. They are ours, certainly, but they are also shaped by history, class, gender, economics, advertising, culture, and the institutions surrounding us. To recognize this does not mean surrendering individual agency. It means understanding the environment within which agency operates. That is why All Consuming deserves attention beyond the world of food writing. Its real subject is the modern consumer, and the increasingly complicated relationship between what we consume, who we believe ourselves to be, and the society we collectively create. About the author. Ruby Tandoh is a British writer, food critic, and author whose work has helped broaden the boundaries of contemporary food writing. She first became widely known through her appearance as a finalist on the Great British Bake Off in 2013. Rather than allowing that association to define her career, Tandoh developed a distinctive body of writing that combines food with questions of culture, politics, class, gender, and identity. Her earlier books include Crumb, the baking book, which approaches baking with an emphasis on accessibility and pleasure rather than culinary elitism, and Eat Up, Food, Appetite, and Eating What You Want, which challenged the restrictive and moralizing assumptions surrounding contemporary eating. Tandoh has written extensively for publications including The Guardian, where she became recognized for food writing that moves beyond recipes and restaurant criticism into broader questions about society and culture. A defining feature of her work is her resistance to the idea that food should be divided neatly into categories of virtue and vice. She has repeatedly challenged diet culture, the moralization of eating, and the tendency to treat bodily appearance as evidence of personal discipline or worth. This makes All Consuming a natural extension of her intellectual trajectory. Tandoh's significance as a food writer lies precisely in her refusal to regard food as an isolated subject. For her, the dinner table is connected to the marketplace, the workplace, the family, the body, the media, and the wider political economy. That interdisciplinary perspective gives All Consuming its distinctive character, and makes Ruby Tandoh an important voice in the continuing transformation of food writing from a primarily culinary genre into a form of cultural criticism.
The author has placed this work in the public domain. It may be freely imported, exported, shared, distributed, edited, modified, or reformatted without explicit consent from the author. As a visually impaired person, the author asserts his rights under the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled. 2013, wipo.int.
Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to show your support.